I sat perfectly still in the mahogany-paneled office, my hands folded over the heavy oak table. Across from me sat Robert and Sylvia, the deadbeat parents who abandoned me at 18 with nothing but a trash bag of clothes. Now, 12 years later, they sat in tailored suits, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. The estate attorney adjusted his glasses and read the final figure aloud. My grandmother's estate was valued at exactly $4,500,000, and I was named the sole executor and beneficiary. Sylvia let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming with manufactured pity. Well, clearly Beatrice was not in her right mind. But do not worry, Valentina, you are just a nurse. You cannot handle this level of capital. We will step in and manage it for you. I did not yell. I just offered her a cold, empty smile and gestured for the attorney to continue. Please, read the next page, I instructed. The attorney turned the heavy parchment. As he read the hidden clause my grandmother meticulously designed, my parents' arrogant smirks instantly crumbled into sheer, unadulterated panic. They thought I was a helpless medical worker, entirely unaware that I actually dismantled digital fraud for federal agencies. Before I explain how I financially annihilated them, drop your city in the comments below. Have you ever destroyed a toxic relative's delusions of grandeur? Hit like and subscribe, because you will not want to miss this execution. To understand the satisfying destruction that took place in that boardroom, we must rewind the timeline to May 2014. I walked up the cracked concrete driveway of my childhood home, the cheap polyester fabric of my high school graduation gown sticking to my calves in the afternoon heat. The driveway stood empty. Robert and Sylvia had skipped the commencement ceremony. They claimed Robert had a pressing corporate merger to oversee, and Sylvia suffered a sudden, debilitating migraine. I turned my brass key in the front door lock, pushed the heavy wood open, and stepped inside. The silence hit me first. The foyer echoed, entirely stripped of the heavy wool runner that usually muffled footsteps. I walked into the living room. The leather sofas, the flat-screen television, the antique Persian rugs all vanished. Faint dust outlines marked the hardwood floors, highlighting exactly where the furniture had rested for a decade. They had stripped the house down to the drywall. The silverware drawers sat empty. The family portraits vanished from the walls. They left nothing but bare hangers swinging in the closets. I moved through the hollow house, checking the dining room, the study, and finally the kitchen. A single piece of white printer paper sat pinned under a generic glass salt shaker on the bare granite island. I picked it up. Sylvia's looping, ostentatious cursive spelled out my new reality. You are 18 now, Valentina. You are a legal adult and a financial burden. We liquidated the college accounts to secure a luxury condominium in Florida. It is time you pulled your own weight. Do not call. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers moving mechanically as I loaded my banking application. I navigated to the college fund my paternal grandparents had established. The screen refreshed, displaying a balance of exactly $0.00. I pulled up the transaction history. Robert had executed a wire transfer 48 hours prior, draining the entire account using his status as the custodial guardian. They planned this theft while I studied for final exams. They calculated the exact day I turned 18 to legally abandon their parental obligations while stripping my financial foundation. I did not scream. I did not collapse onto the tile floor. I stripped the graduation gown off my shoulders, shoved it into the kitchen trash can, and walked out the door, abandoning the empty house just as they had abandoned me. I spent the next 4 years surviving on 80 hours of manual labor a week. I scrubbed bedpans during the graveyard shift at a local long-term care facility. I poured stale coffee at a highway diner from dawn until noon. I attended nursing lectures in the afternoon, fighting the crushing weight of exhaustion, and paid every tuition bill in cash. I earned my registered nursing license. But the chaotic, emotional environment of bedside care offered no appeal. My brain craves rigid structure. My mind demands cold logic, verifiable data, and absolute compliance. I transitioned away from the hospital floor and entered the hyper-specialized, unforgiving realm of forensic nursing and medical auditing. By my mid-20s, I worked as a senior consultant, contracting with federal agencies and massive insurance conglomerates. I dissected digital health records line by line. I traced forged physician signatures by analyzing electronic metadata and unraveled sophisticated Medicare billing fraud. Most importantly, I tracked diverted narcotics. I learned the digital architecture of pharmacy, dispensing logs, monitoring the chain of custody from the manufacturer to the hospice bedside. I hunted corrupt medical administrators and dismantled their illegal empires using nothing but keystrokes, timestamp metadata, and audit trails. I learned how to locate the microscopic digital fingerprints arrogant criminals always leave behind. I became an apex predator in a digital jungle. Through those grueling years, I maintained one singular emotional tether, Beatrice. My paternal grandmother watched Robert and Sylvia drain everyone around them. She witnessed their parasitic greed early on and adapted her survival strategy to the outside world. Beatrice played the role of a frail, impoverished widow clinging to a meager pension. She wore frayed 10-year-old sweaters, clipped grocery store coupons with surgical precision, and drove a rusted sedan manufactured in the late 90s. She routinely complained about the rising cost of heating oil. Robert and Sylvia ignored her entirely, convinced she possessed nothing worth stealing. They treated her like a nuisance, refusing to return her phone calls or visit during the holidays. They never looked beneath the surface. They never saw the commercial real estate deeds locked inside her heavy steel safety deposit box. Beatrice systematically purchased strip malls and apartment complexes across the state, quietly funneling the massive rental income into diversified, shielded trusts. She built a financial fortress in absolute secrecy, utilizing proxy attorneys and shell companies to mask her acquisitions. She trusted no one but me. "Let them think you are ordinary, Valentina," she instructed over cups of bitter black tea at her laminate kitchen table. She slid a thick stack of property yield reports toward me, teaching me how to read the margins. "Arrogance creates massive blind spots. Your parents operate on ego. They will hang themselves if you give them enough rope. Never show your hand until you are ready to sweep the board." I absorbed her lessons, mastering the art of the unassuming facade. On August 1st, 2026, my phone vibrated against my glass desk. The hospice facility director informed me Beatrice's heart had finally stopped. She was 82 years old. I closed my laptop, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to the facility. The room smelled of sharp antiseptic and fading lavender. I did not weep in the hallway. I approached her bed, verified her time of death, and signed the transfer forms with sterile, clinical detachment. I contacted the funeral director, selected a modest mahogany casket, and wired the payment directly from my checking account. I organized the death certificates and immediately secured her physical property, changing the locks on her modest house before the sun even set. I functioned like a highly calibrated machine, processing the logistics of death because mourning requires a vulnerability I refused to display to the world. I sat in the sterile funeral home office, watching the laser printer spit out the final itemized receipts. The warm ink dried on the crisp paper. The clock ticked toward the inevitable confrontation. Beatrice was gone, and the camouflage she wore for decades evaporated with her final breath. The hidden trusts would soon undergo probate, and the court filings would become public record. I knew the scent of unshielded capital would travel fast. The vultures were already circling, packing their designer mourning clothes, booking their first-class tickets, ready to descend on the carcass. They thought they were flying north to manipulate a grieving, isolated nurse. They had absolutely no idea they were marching straight into a slaughterhouse. The sun beat down relentlessly on the manicured grass of the cemetery on August 7th, 2026. Thick humidity hung in the air, stifling the breath of the 24 elderly attendees gathered around the deep, rectangular excavation. I stood at the head of the grave, the fabric of my tailored charcoal suit absorbing the sweltering heat. I did not dab my forehead. I kept my posture rigid, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. Beatrice's neighbors and fellow bingo club members murmured quiet condolences, wiping genuine tears with crumpled tissues. They knew the woman who baked them casseroles and helped mend their torn hemlines. None of them knew the ruthless real estate mogul resting inside the mahogany casket. The eulogy concluded. The priest closed his leather-bound Bible. Before the groundskeepers could engage the mechanical lowering device, the sharp crunch of heavy tires against the gravel path shattered the quiet morning. A rented black town car rolled to a halt just inches from the perimeter of the burial site. The engine idled. The tinted rear windows rolled down slightly, allowing the occupants to survey the crowd before making their entrance. The driver exited and pulled the rear passenger door open. Sylvia stepped out first. She wore a wide-brimmed black hat casting a severe shadow over her face, coupled with a tailored crepe midi dress that screamed of European runways. A string of oversized pearls rested against her collarbone. Robert followed, buttoning a bespoke obsidian suit that stretched tightly across his aging frame. He adjusted his silk tie, shooting his cuffs to flash a heavy gold watch. They did not look like individuals mourning a mother and mother-in-law. They looked like predators arriving at a corporate acquisition. They had not seen me in 12 years. They did not recognize the 30-year-old woman observing them from the head of the grave. They scanned the crowd, their eyes dismissing the elderly neighbors in their modest department store cardigans, searching for the person holding the authority. Sylvia launched her performance immediately. She pressed a laced handkerchief to her dry eyes, letting out a sharp, theatrical sob that carried across the headstones. She threw her arms around an elderly neighbor who looked entirely bewildered by the sudden physical contact. "It shatters my heart," Sylvia wailed, projecting her voice to ensure maximum audience penetration. "We wanted to fly her down to Florida to live with us in the condominium, but she insisted on staying in that drafty little house. We worried about her every single day. The distance was pure agony." I watched the lies spill from her mouth. She had not dialed Beatrice's phone number a single time in over a decade. I analyzed her physical cues using the same clinical metrics I applied during fraud interrogations. Her breathing remained steady. Her tear ducts produced no moisture. The pitch of her voice fluctuated purely for dramatic effect. Robert stood behind her, placing a comforting hand on his wife's waist, playing the role of the steadfast, wealthy patriarch. He nodded solemnly at the confused mourners, projecting an aura of immense aristocratic burden. He offered firm handshakes to Beatrice's friends, introducing himself as the dutiful son who arrived to shoulder the heavy responsibilities of death. While Sylvia continued her fabricated lamentations, her gaze darted rapidly around the gravesite. Her eyes locked onto the vintage sapphire brooch pinned to the lapel of my suit jacket, a piece Beatrice wore every Sunday. I watched Sylvia's pupils dilate. I watched her calculate the carat weight and appraise the antique platinum setting. The fake grief ceased for a fraction of a second, replaced by naked, calculating greed. She nudged Robert, tilting her chin subtly toward the jewelry. Robert tracked her gaze. He finally registered my presence. The realization washed over him. The imposing woman standing beside the casket was the teenager they abandoned in an empty house. He did not show remorse. He did not offer an apology. His chest expanded. He plastered a wide, patronizing smile across his face and marched directly toward me, stepping carelessly over a neighboring headstone. "Valentina," Robert announced, his voice booming over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. He closed the distance and thrust his arm forward, attempting to drop his heavy, sweating hand onto my shoulder. It is a classic physical dominance tactic designed to make the recipient shrink, a move he utilized constantly during my childhood. I did not shrink. I analyzed the trajectory of his arm and took a smooth, deliberate half-step backward. His hand grabbed nothing but the humid August air. He stumbled slightly, his polished leather shoes slipping on the damp grass. His smile faltered, a flash of genuine irritation cracking his practiced facade. "You look well," he recovered, clearing his throat and shoving his hands into his suit pockets. "It is a tragedy, a complete tragedy, but you do not need to worry about anything anymore. Your mother and I are here now." Sylvia glided over, positioning herself next to Robert. She stared directly at the sapphire brooch, entirely ignoring my face. "You did a passable job with the arrangements, sweetheart," she offered, her tone dripping with condescension. "But we know how overwhelming this must be for someone in your position. You work at a hospital, right? Long shifts, exhausting work. You must be completely drained." Robert leaned closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial hush. "We will handle all the complicated paperwork moving forward. The death certificates, the bank accounts, the deed to her little house. We will take the administrative burden entirely off your plate. Just hand over the keys and the personal effects, and you can get back to your nursing shifts." They wanted immediate access to her residence. They wanted to tear through her filing cabinets, search for hidden cash, and seize the assets before probate courts initiated the official asset inventory. They viewed Beatrice's death as a liquidation event, and they expected me to hand over the inventory logs without a single question. I maintained my detached, clinical observation. I did not engage the insult regarding my profession. I did not recount my credentials or inform them that analyzing complicated paperwork regarding death and fraud constituted my daily existence. Engaging in an emotional public argument provides narcissists with the ammunition they crave. It grants them a narrative of a hysterical, uncooperative daughter. I refused to surrender control of any narrative. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal blazer. I extracted a heavy piece of premium cardstock. I extended my arm, holding the business card between my index and middle finger. Robert frowned, pulling his hand from his pocket to accept the card. He read the embossed silver lettering. "That is the contact information for the estate attorney," I stated, my voice devoid of any inflection. "He possesses the keys to the property. He possesses the death certificates. The official reading of the will is scheduled for August 10th at 9 in the morning at his downtown office." Sylvia peered over Robert's shoulder, her eyes scanning the attorney's credentials. A smirk tugged at the corner of her bright red lips. They assumed Beatrice scraped together a few $100s to hire a cheap strip mall lawyer to divide a meager checking account and a deteriorating house. Robert pocketed the card. He puffed his chest out again, reclaiming his perceived superiority. "August 10th, excellent. We will see you there. Valentina. Try not to stress yourself in the meantime. The adults will take it from here." They turned away. Walking back toward the waiting black town car, Sylvia hooked her arm through Robert's, whispering rapidly into his ear, undoubtedly dividing the antique jewelry and planning the liquidation of Beatrice's modest estate. They climbed into the air-conditioned vehicle, the heavy doors slamming shut, and the tires crunching the gravel as they drove away from the cemetery. I watched the car disappear past the iron gates. Their arrogant smirks confirmed their precise mental calculations. They believed I remained the helpless 18-year-old they discarded 12 years prior. They believed I lacked the intellect and the resources to protect my grandmother's legacy. They marched blindly toward the reading of the will, convinced they were closing a lucrative, effortless acquisition. They were ripe for financial slaughter, entirely oblivious to the lethal trap Beatrice and I built specifically for them. On the morning of August 10th, 2026, the heavy glass doors of the downtown law firm slid open, admitting Robert and Sylvia into the quiet reception area. They marched across the polished marble floor, projecting an aura of absolute ownership. Robert wore a navy pinstripe suit, his chest puffed outward, while Sylvia draped a cashmere shawl over her shoulders, her heels clicking a rapid, demanding rhythm. They bypassed the receptionist entirely, striding directly toward the mahogany-paneled conference room as if they held the title to the building. I already occupied the room. I sat at the far end of the heavy oak table, my hands folded neatly over a leather portfolio. I wore a tailored black suit, my posture rigidly straight. A ceramic cup of black coffee rested to my right. I watched them enter. They did not offer a greeting. Robert pulled out a chair at the center of the table, scraping the wooden legs loudly against the floor, and dropped into the seat with aggressive entitlement. Sylvia glided into the chair beside him, pulling out her smartphone to check her reflection in the darkened screen. They exuded the relaxed, eager confidence of scavengers who believed the carcass lay completely unguarded. The estate attorney entered moments later, carrying a thick, brass-clasped folder. He took his seat at the head of the table, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, and broke the seal on Beatrice's final testament. The room fell silent, save for the crisp rustle of heavy parchment. Robert leaned forward, resting his elbows on the oak surface, his eyes locked onto the folder. He expected the attorney to list a depleted checking account, a life insurance policy barely covering the burial, and the deed to a dilapidated house. The attorney cleared his throat and began reading the itemized asset inventory. He did not read from a list of meager savings. He began with commercial real estate. He detailed the deed to a 90-unit apartment complex located in a rapidly gentrifying metropolitan district. Robert frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. The attorney continued, listing a retail strip mall generating substantial monthly lease revenue. Sylvia stopped tapping her manicured nails against the table. Her posture went completely rigid. The attorney moved to the liquid assets, listing a diversified portfolio of high-yield municipal bonds and a series of shielded holding trusts. Robert and Sylvia stared at the attorney, their mouths falling slightly open. Their brains struggled to process the data. The frail, impoverished widow they ignored for a decade possessed a financial empire. The attorney turned the page, his voice steady and clinical. He read the final, aggregate valuation of the estate. The total amounted to exactly $4,500,000. A sharp, audible gasp escaped Sylvia's throat. The greed hit her bloodstream like a narcotic. Her eyes widened, the pupils dilating massively as she calculated the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, and the exclusive country club memberships that staggering sum could purchase. Robert let out a low, victorious breath, his hands gripping the edge of the oak table. He shot a triumphant, predatory glance toward his wife, ready to seize the fortune. Then, the attorney read the beneficiary designation, the estate, in its absolute entirety, transferred exclusively to me. The triumphant gleam in Robert's eyes extinguished instantly. A heavy, suffocating tension slammed down over the room. Sylvia's head snapped toward me, her jaw clenching so tightly the muscles in her cheeks twitched. She stared at the woman she abandoned at 18, realizing I now held the keys to a multi-million-dollar empire. The silence stretched, thick and combustible. Sylvia, desperate to regain control of the narrative, pivoted to her default weapon, patronizing condescension. She let out a sharp, theatrical laugh, waving her hand dismissively through the air. She leaned across the table, fixing her gaze on me, her eyes gleaming with manufactured pity. Well, clearly Beatrice was not in her right mind toward the end. The poor thing was obviously confused. Sylvia smoothed her cashmere shawl, projecting an air of maternal authority. But do not worry, Valentina. We know you are just a nurse. You work grueling shifts. You simply cannot handle this level of capital or manage commercial properties. We will step in and manage the estate for you. Robert nodded vigorously in agreement, instantly attempting to establish a verbal contract. Exactly, we will establish a management trust. You sign the executor duties over to us, and we will ensure you receive a modest monthly stipend, and is the only responsible way to handle this. I did not yell. I did not hurl 12 years of suppressed rage across the table. I maintained my detached, forensic observation. I looked at the two grifters attempting to separate me from my grandmother's legacy using cheap manipulation tactics. I offered Sylvia a cold, empty smile. I turned my head toward the head of the table. Please, read the next page. I instructed the attorney. The lawyer nodded, turning the heavy parchment. This is a sworn, notarized affidavit, attached as an irrevocable codicil to the primary testament, he announced, as he read the hidden clause, Beatrice, meticulously engineered. The arrogant smirks plastered across my parents' faces crumbled into sheer, unadulterated panic. Beatrice did not merely write a will, she weaponized it. The attorney read my grandmother's words, her voice echoing from the grave with lethal precision. The affidavit explicitly documented Robert and Sylvia's history of financial predation. Beatrice detailed the exact events of May 2014, providing banking records proving Robert drained my college fund. She documented multiple instances where Sylvia attempted to manipulate her into signing over the deed to her house. The attorney reached the legal mechanism, the poison pill. Beatrice established a fortified no-contest directive, combined with a declaration of estrangement. The clause explicitly barred Robert and Sylvia from challenging the will in probate court, stipulating that any legal challenge they mounted would trigger an automatic, pre-funded civil lawsuit against them for their past financial abuses, utilizing evidence she preserved in a separate trust. The room descended into a suffocating vacuum. The legal blockade was absolute. Beatrice boxed them out of the probate process entirely, locking the $4,500,000 behind a titanium wall of irrefutable evidence. A deep, violent crimson crept up Robert's neck, swallowing his jawline. His veneer of aristocratic sophistication shattered. Exposing the frantic, cornered con artist beneath, he shoved his chair back. The wooden legs screeched against the floorboards. He slammed his closed fist onto the heavy oak table, the impact rattling my coffee cup. "This is a total fabrication," Robert roared, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "You coerced her. You manipulated a dying, vulnerable senior citizen into signing a fraudulent document to steal our inheritance." I did not flinch. I held his furious gaze, my expression completely glacial. "The document bears the signature of 2 independent medical examiners, verifying her cognitive capacity on the day of signing," I replied smoothly. "Your inheritance never existed, Robert." Beside him, Sylvia clutched her throat. Her chest heaved in rapid, shallow jerks. She began to hyperventilate. The realization hit her central nervous system. The traditional legal avenues were completely blocked. No probate judge would entertain a challenge against a will fortified with independent medical evaluations and documented proof of past parental theft. The luxury yachts and penthouse apartments she envisioned just minutes prior evaporated into thin air. "You will not get away with this," Sylvia hissed, her voice cracking as she gasped for air. She grabbed her designer handbag, her knuckles turning stark white around the leather straps. She stared at me with pure, venomous hatred. "We are your parents. We know exactly how unstable you really are." Robert stepped around the table, leaning his flushed face toward mine, attempting one final maneuver of physical intimidation. "You think a piece of paper stops me?" he growled, dropping his voice to a threatening register. "We will prove you are legally unfit to manage a single dime of that capital. We will tear your life apart. Valentina, we will expose exactly what kind of person you are." I remained seated, completely unbothered by his proximity. "The exit is behind you," I stated, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Robert sneered, spun on his heel, and marched toward the door. Sylvia followed, her heels striking the marble floor with frantic, uncoordinated steps. They shoved the heavy glass doors open and stormed out of the law firm, leaving a trail of hollow threats echoing in the corridor. The heavy doors swung shut, sealing the room in quiet tranquility once again. The estate attorney let out a long, slow breath, organizing the parchment documents back into the brass-clasped folder. I leaned back in my leather chair. I picked up my ceramic cup and took a slow sip of the black coffee. The dark liquid burned pleasantly against the back of my throat. I looked at the empty chairs across the oak table. I knew exactly how predators operated when backed into a corner, denied access to legitimate legal channels. Their towering arrogance and insatiable greed would inevitably drive them to execute a catastrophic, illegal miscalculation. I set my cup down, preparing to audit their destruction. 4 days elapsed. On the afternoon of August 14th, 2026, the psychological compression officially commenced. I sat in my home office, reviewing digital audit logs for a federal client, when a sharp, authoritative knock rattled my front door. I descended the stairs and opened the heavy wooden entryway to find a courier standing on my porch. He held an oversized, rigid cardboard envelope secured with red, tamper-evident tape. He required a digital signature. I tapped my stylus against his tablet, accepted the package without a word, and returned to my office. I dropped the heavy envelope onto my glass desk. The return address bore the official, embossed seal of the State Board of Nursing. I retrieved a steel letter opener from my drawer and sliced through the thick cardboard. I extracted a dense stack of legal documents printed on heavy state letterhead. The bold, capitalized text across the top page commanded immediate attention: emergency order of suspension. I read the document. My registered nursing license number sat centered on the page, flanked by the legal statutes detailing my immediate, indefinite removal from all clinical and consulting practice. I flipped to the statement of charges. A cold, escalating clarity washed over my central nervous system. Robert and Sylvia did not merely file a nuisance lawsuit. They executed a coordinated, malicious character assassination designed to trigger state and federal investigations. The first count alleged severe elder abuse. The complaint detailed horrific, fabricated accounts of me isolating Beatrice during her final weeks in hospice, restricting her access to visitors, and inflicting sustained emotional and physical trauma. The words painted a portrait of a sadistic caregiver preying on a vulnerable senior citizen. The second count elevated the slander from a state licensing violation to a massive federal felony. Robert and Sylvia formally accused me of systematic narcotic diversion. The document alleged I utilized my medical credentials to hoard high-grade Schedule II narcotics specifically, liquid morphine and transdermal fentanyl patches intended for Beatrice's palliative care. They claimed I siphoned the medications to distribute and sell them on the illicit street market. I turned to the evidence appendices. They did not just submit an angry, baseless letter. They supplied a manufactured reality. I spread the attachments across the glass surface of my desk. I examined copies of pharmacy dispensing logs, inventory flow sheets, and hospice physician authorization forms. They looked incredibly authentic. The papers bore the correct institutional logos, the standard barcode formatting, and the precise medical terminology utilized by the regional hospice provider. The physician signatures appeared flawless, matching the looping cursive of Beatrice's actual palliative care doctor. They orchestrated a brilliant, ruthless forgery. They understood that a regulatory medical board operates on extreme risk aversion, presented with documented proof of narcotic diversion and elder abuse. The State Board of Nursing possessed no choice but to issue a summary suspension pending a full criminal inquiry. My parents intended to strip away my professional license, obliterate my primary source of income, and brand me a drug-addicted felon before I could ever access a single dollar of the $4,500,000 estate. The silence in my office shattered. My smartphone, resting beside my keyboard, vibrated violently against the glass. A barrage of notifications flooded the locked screen. The digital assault matched the physical delivery of the suspension order perfectly. Sylvia did not merely file a confidential board complaint, she weaponized the allegations, launching a vicious, synchronized smear campaign across my entire social and professional network. I unlocked the device. I opened my personal messaging application. The screen filled with rapid-fire texts from extended family members, aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had ignored me for 12 years but remained firmly tethered to Sylvia's toxic gossip pipeline. "How could you do that to your own grandmother?" One message read, "You are an absolute monster. Get help for your addiction." Read another. Sylvia forwarded the core allegations to every contact in her registry. She spun a tragic, theatrical narrative, casting herself as the devastated, heartbroken mother discovering her estranged daughter's horrific descent into drug trafficking and elder abuse. She provided them with just enough fabricated evidence to cement the lie, isolating me instantly and completely. My email application chimed. I switched screens and opened a message marked with high-priority red flags. The sender was the compliance director at my forensic consulting firm. The subject line read, "Urgent. Administrative leave." I scanned the brief, sterile corporate text. The firm received an anonymous package containing the Board of Nursing suspension order, recognizing the catastrophic liability of employing a forensic auditor actively accused of felony narcotic diversion. They severed my access. The email ordered me to surrender my corporate credentials and cease all contact with federal clients immediately. The social and professional isolation was absolute. Within a 20-minute window, Robert and Sylvia annihilated my reputation, dismantled my career, and poisoned my entire extended family against me. They engineered a suffocating psychological vacuum. They expected the vacuum to crush me. They anticipated a frantic, hysterical phone call. They envisioned me collapsing onto the floor of my office, weeping uncontrollably, begging them to retract the allegations, ready to surrender the estate in exchange for my freedom. They assumed a nurse would crumble under the terrifying weight of federal drug charges and public humiliation. They forgot my actual expertise. They forgot I do not provide bedside comfort. I dissect medical fraud. I did not shed a single tear. I did not hurl my phone against the wall or scream into the empty house. The adrenaline coursing through my veins crystallized into absolute, predatory focus. I picked up the forged pharmacy logs and held them directly under my desk lamp. I scrutinized the pixelation around the physician's signatures. I analyzed the margins of the barcode stamps. Visual perfection on a printed page is an illusion designed to fool amateurs. In the realm of digital health records, every document leaves an immutable metadata footprint. I recognized the specific layout formatting. The documents were not generated by a hospital server. They were generated using high-end legal PDF compilation software. I dropped the papers back onto the glass desk. I ignored the buzzing phone and the endless stream of disgusted text messages. The court of public opinion meant absolutely nothing to me. Let Sylvia play the tragic mother. Let the extended family hurl their insults. Let the consulting firm suspend my contract. They were fighting a war of perception. I fight wars of data. I turned my chair toward my heavy, multi-monitor workstation. I flipped the power switch. The cooling fans whirred to life, a low, steady mechanical hum cutting through the quiet room. I engaged my encrypted virtual private network, masking my location and establishing a secure, untraceable connection. I opened my proprietary forensic auditing software, the same suite of tools I utilized to hunt corrupt hospital administrators and dismantle Medicare embezzlement rings. My parents brought forged paper to a digital war. They thought they cornered a helpless victim. Instead, they handed an apex predator a map directly to their vulnerabilities. I cracked my knuckles, typed my decryption key, and initiated the hunt. The sun breached the horizon on the morning of August 15, 2026, casting sharp, blinding rays through the slats of my office blinds. I had not slept. I consumed 3 cups of black coffee throughout the night, my eyes locked on the cascading data streams across my dual monitors, unraveling the digital threads of my parents' medical forgery. The quiet hum of my workstation broke abruptly. A heavy, rhythmic pounding rattled my front door. I descended the staircase, the hardwood cool beneath my bare feet, and pulled the heavy door open. A man in a wrinkled polo shirt stood on my porch, holding a thick stack of legal documents secured by a heavy brass binder clip. He did not offer a polite morning greeting. He shoved the paperwork toward my chest, snapped a photograph of me holding the stack with his smartphone, and retreated to his idling sedan. I shut the door, securing the deadbolt. I carried the heavy stack to my kitchen island, dropping it onto the granite surface. The top page bore the official seal of the Probate and Family Court. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the cold stone, and read the bold, capitalized heading, Emergency Petition for Appointment of Conservator. The true motive behind the devastating slander campaign finally materialized in black and white. I flipped the page, locating the Council of Record. The documents originated from the desk of Winston, a sleazy, high-priced attorney known in elite circles for facilitating hostile takeovers and burying ethical violations under avalanches of aggressive litigation. I scrutinized the legal architecture Winston drafted. It was a brilliant, ruthless trap engineered to bypass the impenetrable titanium wall my grandmother built. Beatrice's sworn affidavit explicitly barred Robert and Sylvia from contesting the validity of the will in probate court. Winston recognized the blockade. He knew he could not attack the testament. Therefore, he chose to attack the executor. He bypassed the inheritance laws entirely by executing a targeted character assassination. I read the dense legal jargon detailing his argument. Winston petitioned the judge to declare me legally incompetent. He weaponized the State Board of Nursing suspension, attaching it as Exhibit A. He drafted paragraphs of sensationalized prose, claiming I suffered from severe, unchecked drug addiction. He referenced the forged pharmacy logs, asserting I operated a dangerous narcotic diversion ring, utilizing a dying senior citizen as my supply source. The petition argued that my pending license revocation and inevitable federal criminal charges rendered me entirely unfit to execute fiduciary duties. Winston painted a horrifying picture of a rogue, unstable medical professional on the brink of a federal indictment, posing a catastrophic risk to Beatrice's legacy. He delivered the ultimate demand on page 12. Winston asked the presiding judge to immediately freeze the $4,500,000 estate. He requested the court strip my executor status and hand total unmitigated fiduciary control to Robert and Sylvia, framing them as the responsible, grieving next of kin, stepping in to protect the assets from their derelict daughter. I stood in the quiet kitchen, dissecting the absolute malice embedded in the paperwork. The strategy relied entirely on shock and awe. They engineered a psychological pressure cooker. By combining a professional suspension, the threat of federal drug trafficking charges, and a massive civil lawsuit, they expected to crush my central nervous system. They calculated my reactions based on a deeply flawed premise. They operated on the assumption that a nurse possesses an inherent terror of regulatory boards and legal threats. Robert and Sylvia envisioned me trembling in my kitchen, weeping over the dense legal jargon, paralyzed by the thought of federal agents kicking down my door. They expected me to dial Robert's number, begging for a compromise. They assumed I would blindly surrender the $4,500,000, voluntarily signing over the estate just to make the terrifying legal threats disappear. They failed to comprehend the reality of my existence. I do not change bandages. I do not chart vital signs or shrink under the authority of aggressive hospital administrators. I spend my daily life destroying corrupt executives. I sit in windowless conference rooms alongside federal prosecutors, projecting digital audit trails onto screens, watching arrogant men sweat as I dismantle their multi-million-dollar medical frauds line by line. I navigate hostile litigation and navigate federal subpoenas as a routine function of my profession. Winston believed he drafted an inescapable legal snare. He thought he cornered a helpless medical worker. He did not realize he just handed an apex predator a signed, physical confession. I picked up the thick stack of court documents and walked back up the stairs to my home office. I placed the emergency petition directly beside the forged pharmacy logs I decrypted hours prior. I examined Winston's signature on the final page of the filing. It was executed in bold, blue ink, proudly verifying the accuracy of the attached exhibits. Winston made a catastrophic, career-ending miscalculation in his arrogant rush to secure control of the estate for his clients. He attached the fabricated hospice inventory sheets directly into the court filings. He submitted manufactured evidence to a presiding judge. He cemented the medical forgery into the public judicial record, elevating the crime from a regulatory complaint to subornation of perjury and fraud upon the court. He tethered his own law license directly to Robert and Sylvia's sinking ship. I opened a new window on my workstation and queried Winston's professional background. I pulled his bar association records, his firm's corporate filings, and his public litigation history. Winston drove leased sports cars, wore custom Italian suits, and funded his extravagant lifestyle by intimidating vulnerable targets. He operated a boutique firm specializing in exploiting legal loopholes for wealthy grifters. He thought he was bullying a floor nurse into submission. I pulled up the scheduling order attached to the back of the petition. Winston requested an expedited emergency hearing, leveraging the immediate danger I supposedly posed to the estate's liquid assets. The court granted the request, scheduling a mandatory appearance for August 20. They granted me exactly 5 days to mount a defense. 5 days of suffocating tension, designed to break my resolve. They wanted me to spend the next 120 hours pacing my living room, watching my reputation burn online, imagining the cold steel of a federal prison cell closing around me. They expected the crushing anxiety to force my surrender before I ever set foot in a courtroom. I refused to pace. I dropped the court documents onto my desk, lowered myself into my ergonomic chair, and cracked my knuckles. I began drafting my counter-offensive. The conservatorship trap relied entirely on the perceived validity of the drug diversion allegations. The entire legal structure rested on the foundation of those forged pharmacy logs. If I destroyed the foundation, the massive legal apparatus Winston constructed would collapse, crushing the architects beneath the concrete. I mapped out the digital architecture connecting Winston's downtown law firm to Robert and Sylvia's luxury condominium in Florida. I tracked the routing numbers, the IP addresses, and the encrypted metadata footprints they carelessly left behind. They brought a forged paper shield to a digital firing squad. I picked up a red pen and circled Winston's signature on the final page of the filing. I decided to give them the exact illusion of victory they craved. I would let them believe their character assassination succeeded flawlessly. I would let them walk into their mediation expecting a terrified, broken victim, ready to sign away her grandmother's legacy. I would let them taste the $4,500,000, right up until the exact moment I executed their total destruction. The psychological pressure cooker reached maximum temperature by nightfall. The silence in my home office amplified the isolation Sylvia engineered. My smartphone sat face up on the glass desk, a toxic slab of glass radiating notifications from estranged relatives continuing their digital assault. I ignored the messages, maintaining my focus on the dual monitors illuminating my face in the darkened room. I cross-referenced the state licensing statutes regarding emergency suspensions, mapping the exact legal trajectory Winston initiated. Suddenly, the screen of my device illuminated, overriding the barrage of slanderous texts. An incoming call banner appeared. Unknown caller. No location data, no caller identification, a blocked, unrecorded line. Grifters operating a federal extortion scheme avoid leaving traceable audio footprints. I stared at the vibrating device. I knew exactly who waited on the other end of the cellular connection. I let it ring 3 times, calculating my emotional baseline. I needed to project absolute panic. I reached across the glass surface, tapped the green icon, and lifted the device to my ear. I did not speak. I held my breath, letting the heavy, suffocated silence stretch across the line. "Valentina," Robert began. His voice poured through the speaker, dripping with a sickening, manufactured paternal warmth. He did not yell. He did not issue immediate demands. He deployed the classic narcissistic tactic, wrapping a death threat in a blanket of fake compassion. "We saw the suspension order," Robert murmured, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh. "Your mother is beside herself. She cannot stop weeping. We never wanted this for you, sweetheart. We never wanted to see you destroy your life like this." I gripped the edge of my desk. He played the role of the devastated patriarch flawlessly. He spoke as if he did not personally forge the pharmacy logs currently resting in a federal database. "The authorities are preparing a criminal indictment, Valentina," he continued, dropping his pitch to a grave. "Conspiratorial register, narcotic diversion, elder abuse. You are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal facility, 10, maybe 15 years. You will lose your nursing license permanently. You will lose your freedom. Your mother and I, we cannot stomach the thought of watching our daughter rot in a prison cell." I remained silent. I forced my breathing to accelerate, allowing the microphone to capture short, rapid intakes of air. I sounded like a cornered animal, exactly as he required. "You are in way over your head," Robert stated, twisting the psychological knife. "You tried to manage Beatrice's estate, and the stress pushed you into a severe relapse. It happens. But the board possesses the evidence. Winston reviewed the pharmacy logs. The case against you is airtight. You possess 0 leverage." The extortion arrived wrapped in legal jargon. "But we are family," Robert offered, his tone shifting from mourning to transactional. "And family protects each other. Winston negotiated a backdoor resolution. We can make the federal drug charges evaporate." I waited. The hook dropped. "We drafted a settlement," Robert explained, the greed leaking through his practiced cadence. "You voluntarily step down as the executor of the estate. You sign a relinquishment agreement, transferring 80% of the capital to a primary management trust controlled by your mother and me. You keep 20% to cover your rehabilitation costs. In exchange, Winston will contact the State Board of Nursing. He will file an affidavit claiming the hospice logs were misinterpreted, a massive clerical misunderstanding. The board drops the investigation. You keep your license. You stay out of prison." They held my entire professional existence hostage. They demanded $3,600,000 in exchange for my liberty. They utilized the state licensing authority as a private collection agency. If I refused, they promised to bury me under a mountain of fabricated federal crimes. If I complied, they walked away with a multi-million-dollar fortune, leaving me a marginalized, permanently tarnished medical worker. Robert paused, allowing the crushing weight of the ultimatum to settle. It is a generous offer, Valentina. It is the only offer. You sign the paperwork, or you pack a bag for a federal holding cell. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults through the receiver or inform him that I possessed the digital metadata linking his home router to the forged documents. Exposing my hand guarantees the enemy a chance to destroy the evidence. I needed him arrogant, comfortable, and entirely oblivious to his impending ruin. I closed my eyes. Regulating my vocal cords, I injected a raw, trembling tremor into my voice. I do not want to go to jail, I whispered, stammering slightly, forcing a synthetic sob into the receiver. I cannot lose my license, Robert. It is everything I have. I know, sweetheart. Robert cooed, practically salivating over my manufactured surrender. Just let us handle this. Let the adults clean up the mess. I choked out the words, grasping for breath, executing the performance of a shattered woman. I need time. I need to read the settlement, please. Just give me a few days to think about the paperwork, to process this. Robert chuckled. It was a low, guttural sound of pure victory. He tasted the $4,500,000. He believed he successfully crushed the spirit of the teenager he discarded 12 years prior. He believed he cornered a helpless nurse, bending her to his absolute will. Take until Thursday, Valentina, Robert commanded, dictating the timeline with supreme authority. Winston will schedule a mediation meeting at his office. Do not contact an outside attorney. Do not call the police. If you alert the authorities, the deal vanishes. And we hand the raw evidence directly to the Drug Enforcement Administration. Make the smart choice. The line went dead. The dial tone hummed in the quiet office. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I placed the device face down on the glass desk. The trembling in my chest ceased instantly. The rapid, panicked breathing evaporated, replaced by a slow, rhythmic intake of oxygen. The terrified, broken daughter vanished into the ether, leaving only the clinical auditor behind. I stood up. I stretched my arms above my head, rolling my shoulders to release the physical tension. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp pops echoing against the walls of the room. Robert believed he just negotiated a masterful extortion. He believed he held all the cards. He failed to comprehend that I recorded the entire unmonitored conversation through a secondary encrypted audio feed wired directly into my workstation. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair. I pulled my keyboard forward. They demanded 80% of my grandmother's legacy. They threatened my freedom. They utilized forged medical records to destroy my professional reputation. I pulled the digital audio file onto my primary monitor, splicing the extortion demand into the growing federal dossier. I compiled the files, encrypted the folders, and prepared to drag them into a digital slaughterhouse. The sun crested the horizon on the morning of August 16th, 2026, but my office remained plunged in artificial darkness. I drew the heavy blackout curtains, severing all visual connection to the outside world. I locked the deadbolt on the heavy oak door. I powered down my personal cellular device and removed the battery, eliminating any possibility of unwanted acoustic surveillance or GPS tracking. I sat at the center of my workstation, flanked by 3 high-definition monitors. The cooling fans within my processing tower whirred to life, generating a low, steady mechanical hum that filled the sterile space. I initiated my proprietary auditing software. The screens flared, casting a harsh, pale blue light across my face. Winston and Robert constructed their extortion trap using paper. They submitted photocopied pharmacy logs and printed affidavits to the State Board of Nursing and the probate court. Arrogant men operating outside their depth consistently mistake physical paper for objective reality. They believe a printed document bearing a signature establishes an unassailable truth. They fail to understand that modern medical infrastructure relies entirely on digital architecture. A piece of paper represents merely a photograph of a digital moment. I do not look at the photograph, I dissect the camera that took it. I place the emergency suspension notice onto the glass surface of my optical character recognition scanner. The machine hummed. Sweeping a laser across the fabricated hospice inventory sheets, Winston submitted to the regulatory board. The software ingested the physical ink, converting the printed text back into raw, manipulatable code. I pulled the digitized documents onto my central monitor. I bypassed standard consumer web gateways. I engaged a heavily encrypted, multi-node virtual private network, masking my location behind a labyrinth of international servers. Utilizing administrative clearance credentials retained from my federal contract work, I initiated a secure digital handshake with the Regional Health Information Exchange. The system authenticated my request. I queried my grandmother's specific patient identification index. The screen cascaded with decades of Beatrice's medical history. I filtered the data, isolating the final 30 days of her palliative care. I bypassed the nursing notes and targeted the automated dispensing cabinet stationed at the regional hospice pharmacy. Every single drop of liquid morphine and every transdermal fentanyl patch prescribed to Beatrice required a biometric fingerprint scan from the dispensing pharmacist, generating an immutable timestamp. I exported the authentic, raw dispensing ledger from the hospice server and positioned it on my left monitor. I positioned Winston's fabricated paper logs on my right monitor. I executed a cross-reference algorithm. The authentic ledger demonstrated perfect compliance. Beatrice received her precise, prescribed dosages. The supply chain matched the disposal records down to the milligram. Zero anomalies existed. Zero diversion occurred. I shifted my focus to the fabricated documents Winston submitted, to the naked eye. The logs looked identical to the authentic records. They utilized the same barcode formatting and institutional branding. I isolated the embedded metadata tag hidden within the digital architecture of Winston's file. Every time a user generates or modifies a portable document format file, the software silently records a digital footprint detailing the author, the exact creation time, and the machine origin. I extracted the hexadecimal code from the fabricated log. The software translated the raw data into readable text. The document creation timestamp read August 12th. 2026. Beatrice expired on August 1st. Robert and Winston generated medical records detailing active narcotic administration 11 days after the patient ceased breathing. The sheer staggering incompetence of their forgery sent a cold thrill through my central nervous system. I dug deeper into the metadata. I traced the routing node embedded in the file generation history. The digital footprint did not map to the hospice provider's secure intranet. The signal bounced through a commercial internet service provider and anchored directly to a static internet protocol address registered in the downtown financial district. I queried the regional internet registry. The static address belonged exclusively to Winston's boutique law firm. They did not hire a sophisticated hacker. They did not infiltrate a hospital database. Robert and Winston sat inside a mahogany-paneled law office, opened a PDF editor, and manually typed fraudulent narcotic inventory sheets to frame me for a federal crime. A single anomaly remained. The forged documents bore the signature of Beatrice's actual palliative care physician. A regulatory board flags typed names, but a cursive signature carries weight. I magnified the digital ink on Winston's submitted file, zooming in 800%. The pixels surrounding the cursive strokes degraded into severe compression artifacts. A jagged rectangular halo framed the physician's name, breaking the smooth white background of the digital paper. The signature did not flow naturally onto the line, it hovered awkwardly. A foreign object violently inserted into the document. I accessed the physician's legitimate charting history within the Health Information Exchange. I deployed a pixel-matching algorithm, scanning hundreds of authentic medical orders signed during Beatrice's hospice admission. The software chewed through the data for 12 minutes before producing a positive match. The algorithm overlaid the signature from the forged narcotic log directly on top of a legitimate authorization for a basic bedside oxygen tank, dated July 15, 2026. The slant, the pressure points, need-the-minute variations in the ink matched with 100% biometric certainty. Robert and Winston located a mundane, legitimate medical document. They utilized a digital lasso tool, cropped the physician's signature, and pasted it directly onto their fabricated narcotic ledger. They spliced the identity of a licensed medical doctor to authorize the existence of phantom drugs. The sun set, plunging my office back into total darkness. But I did not stop working. The timeline shifted into August 17th. I consumed another cup of bitter, black coffee and began constructing the weapon. I did not draft a defensive letter to the State Board of Nursing. Submitting evidence to a state regulatory body triggers a slow, bureaucratic administrative review. I required absolute, immediate annihilation. I opened a secure, encrypted folder on my localized drive. I compiled the authentic electronic health records, the raw hospice dispensing ledgers, and the timestamp discrepancies. I saved the static internet protocol logs anchoring the forgery directly to Winston's servers. I captured the pixel-by-pixel analysis proving the digital splice of the physician's signature. I generated a blockchain-verified hash for every single file, mathematically sealing the evidence to ensure an unbreakable chain of custody. No defense attorney could claim the digital files suffered tampering or manipulation. The math remained absolute. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the harsh light reflecting in my eyes. Winston and Robert believed they filed a simple character assassination to steal $4,500,000. They believed they bullied a vulnerable nurse. I looked at the compiled dossier. They committed wire fraud, identity theft, subornation of perjury, and the federal forgery of classified medical records utilizing interstate digital lines. I worked in complete deadly silence. I did not possess a defense strategy. I possessed a fully loaded, irrefutable federal indictment. The extortion trap they engineered dissolved into dust. I encrypted the master folder, locked the drive, and prepared to lure them into the execution chamber. The sun breached the horizon on the morning of August 18, 2026, casting sharp rays through the gaps in my office blinds. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic chair, sipping a fresh cup of bitter black coffee. The medical forgery dossier sat securely encrypted on my offline drive, a lethal weapon waiting for deployment. I shifted my focus from the fabricated pharmacy logs to the ultimate objective, the capital. Grifters like Robert and Sylvia suffer from a fatal, biological lack of patience. They crave instant gratification. They cannot endure the slow, bureaucratic grind of the probate system, even when they believe they rigged through character assassination. They require immediate validation. They require the physical manifestation of wealth to soothe their towering egos. I knew they would not wait for the judge to rule on the conservatorship petition. They would reach for the money immediately. I turned my chair toward the secondary monitor. I initiated a targeted financial inquiry. I bypassed standard consumer credit bureaus, utilizing my forensic clearance to tap directly into the county clerk's digitized property records. I queried the parcel identification numbers corresponding to Beatrice's commercial real estate holdings, starting with the most valuable asset, the 90-unit apartment complex. The database processed the request, the cooling fans in my processing tower whining as the system retrieved the historical title chain. I scrolled past decades of clean, unencumbered ownership. Beatrice managed her empire with meticulous discipline. My eyes halted at the very bottom of the ledger. A brand new entry existed. The registry recorded a fresh commercial lien, filed less than 48 hours prior. I isolated the filing, authorizing the municipal extraction fee to download the raw document. The portable document format materialized on my screen. I dissected the legal architecture. Robert and Sylvia had executed a collateralized bridge loan. They secured exactly $1,200,000 against the equity of my grandmother's apartment complex. To secure a commercial loan of that magnitude requires rigid underwriting. Legitimate federal banks demand verified deeds, death certificates, and absolute fiduciary authority confirmed by a probate judge. Robert and Sylvia possessed none of those credentials. Therefore, they bypassed legitimate federal banking institutions, seeking capital from a predatory private equity firm operating out of Delaware, a shadow lender willing to overlook missing judicial signatures in exchange for exorbitant, punishing interest rates. I scrutinized the signature block on the final page of the loan origination agreement. Robert and Sylvia signed their names in bold ink, falsely claiming the title of primary estate executors. Winston authorized the transaction, stamping his state bar credential beneath a paragraph validating their impending fiduciary control. He attached a copy of the emergency conservatorship petition, weaponizing a pending, unruled court motion as proof of legal ownership. They pledged concrete collateral they did not legally possess. They crossed a massive, irreversible threshold. They triggered a catastrophic sequence of federal statutes. State-level slander transitioned instantly into massive federal bank fraud. I did not stop at the loan origination. Forensic auditing demands tracing the asset to its final resting place. I extracted the routing sequence embedded in the private lender's disbursement summary. The equity firm wired the $1,200,000 directly into a corporate escrow account. I recognized the 9-digit routing integer. The account belonged exclusively to Winston's downtown law firm. He commingled fraudulent commercial loan disbursements within his client trust account, obliterating the fundamental ethical boundaries of his profession. He transformed his legitimate law firm into an active, aggressive money laundering conduit. I deployed a packet-sniffing algorithm, penetrating the public routing ledger of the receiving bank. I could not view the internal account balances without a federal subpoena, but I could track the outgoing wire transfers initiated from Winston's routing number over the past 24 hours. The data returned 3 massive digital footprints. Winston initiated the first transfer, routing a substantial cut of the capital directly into his firm's operating account. He claimed his fee for orchestrating the federal fraud before the ink even dried. He splintered the remaining capital, executing 2 distinct interstate wire transfers on behalf of his clients. I tracked the first string of numbers. The funds bounced through a financial clearinghouse in Atlanta before dropping into a commercial real estate trust located in southern Florida. I cross-referenced the receiving trust against Miami-Dade municipal property records. The trust managed luxury high-rise developments. Robert and Sylvia wired a massive, non-refundable down payment for a panoramic penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. I pivoted to the second outgoing wire. The capital traveled to a maritime brokerage operating out of Fort Lauderdale. I accessed the brokerage's public inventory, matching the exact dollar amount of the wire transfer to a specific pending transaction. They placed a heavy deposit on a 60-foot luxury motor yacht. I leaned back, resting my head against the headrest. The glow of the dual monitors reflected off my retinas. The sheer staggering magnitude of their arrogance filled the quiet office. They did not wait for the probate judge to strip my executor status. They did not wait for the State Board of Nursing to finalize my professional suspension. They felt so invincible, so entirely convinced of my impending psychological collapse, that they started spending the $4,500,000 before they even held the keys to the vault. They purchased a luxury yacht and a Miami penthouse utilizing stolen equity, broadcasting their crimes across state lines. They utilized telecommunication networks to authorize the transfers, triggering the federal wire fraud statute. Every signature they applied, every routing number they generated, operated as a distinct, punishable federal felony. I reached for my keyboard. I utilized a specialized screen capture utility, snapping high-resolution images of the digital architecture. I captured the municipal lien, the private equity loan origination agreement, the forged executive signatures, and the exact timestamps of the interstate wire transfers. I dragged the image files into my encrypted master dossier. I generated a cryptographic hash for each new piece of evidence, sealing the digital chain of custody. I linked the medical forgery directly to the financial theft, creating an inescapable, suffocating web of federal indictments. Robert and Sylvia thought they purchased a new, glamorous life on the water. They actually financed their own incarceration. Every single dollar they spent hammered another heavy iron nail into their coffin. The extortion offer Robert made on the unrecorded line echoed in my memory. He demanded 80% of the estate. He threatened my freedom. He believed he controlled the narrative and dictated the terms of my surrender. I closed the property registry database. I locked the encrypted drive containing the complete forensic audit. I stared at the blank screen, calculating the final trajectory of the operation. The digital hunt concluded. I possessed the weapon. I mapped the entire blast radius. I only required the targets to step willingly into the execution chamber. The morning of August 19, 2026, brought heavy rain against my office windows. The droplets lashed the glass in rapid, chaotic bursts. But inside, my environment remained meticulously controlled. The digital hunt concluded the previous evening. I possessed the evidence. I possessed the routing numbers tracing the stolen $1,200,000 to Miami and Fort Lauderdale. I possessed the pixel-by-pixel analysis proving the medical forgery. I needed to move the targets from the digital realm into a physical, inescapable space. I pushed my ergonomic chair away from the dual monitors. I reached for my smartphone, disabling the encryption protocols that masked my caller identification. To spring the trap, the prey must recognize the bait. I navigated to the contact application and inputted the primary phone number for Winston's downtown law firm. I held the device near my ear, letting it ring twice before a receptionist intercepted the call. I asked for Winston. The receptionist placed me on a brief hold. A smooth, instrumental track filled the silence. I utilized those seconds to manipulate my physiological state. I restricted my breathing, taking shallow, irregular gasps. I clenched my jaw until the muscles ached, manufacturing a tremor that resonated through my vocal cords. The hold music ceased. The line clicked. "Winston speaking," the sleazy attorney answered, his voice exuding greasy, practiced authority. "This is Valentina," I replied. I let my voice crack on the final syllable. I injected a raw, desperate waver into the silence that followed. Winston let out a sharp, satisfied exhale. "Valentina, I anticipated your call. Did you review the settlement parameters your father outlined? The emergency conservatorship hearing approaches rapidly. You run out of options." "I read the petition," I stuttered, forcing my breathing to quicken. I saw the attachments, the pharmacy logs. The State Board of Nursing takes narcotic diversion incredibly seriously, Winston purred, twisting the psychological knife. Federal prosecutors take it even more seriously. We hold the evidence. Valentina, we possess the leverage. You face decades in a federal facility. "I cannot go to prison," I whispered, pitching my voice into a frantic, defeated plea. "I cannot lose my nursing license. It represents my entire livelihood if I fight you in probate court. I cannot afford the legal fees. I lack the capital to mount a defense against these allegations." I fed him the exact narrative he constructed. I handed him the illusion of total victory. "I will sign the conservatorship documents," I capitulated, letting a synthetic sob slip through my lips. "I will surrender the executor status. I will sign over the estate to Robert and Sylvia, just as they asked. Just please withdraw the board complaint. Make the criminal investigation stop." A low, arrogant chuckle vibrated through the receiver. The sound crawled through the speaker, heavy with unchecked ego and predatory triumph. Winston tasted the $4,500,000. He calculated his percentage. He believed he broke a medical worker using cheap intimidation and fabricated paper. "A very pragmatic decision," Winston crooned, adopting the tone of a benevolent victor. "Your parents simply wish to protect Beatrice's legacy from mismanagement. They harbor no desire to destroy your life. Provided you cooperate fully, we can execute the relinquishment agreements and establish the management trust quietly." "I do not want a courtroom spectacle," I pleaded, maintaining the facade of a shattered victim. "Can we handle the signatures privately, in your office?" "Absolutely," Winston agreed, snapping at the bait without a single hesitation. "We can finalize the mediation tomorrow afternoon, August 20, 2 o'clock sharp. Come to my downtown office. Bring your government identification. Robert and Sylvia will attend to execute the trust transfers." "I will be there," I whispered. "Just have the retraction letters ready for the nursing board." "We will handle the board," Winston promised. "Do not arrive late. Valentina." The line went dead. He severed the connection, rushing to contact Robert and Sylvia, eager to announce their multi-million-dollar acquisition. I lowered the phone to my desk. The trembling in my chest vanished instantly. My breathing returned to a slow, methodical rhythm. I captured the recording of his smug, extortionate demands, saving the audio file to my encrypted drive. The location was secured, the trap locked into place. I spent the remainder of the afternoon converting my digital arsenal into physical, undeniable weapons. A courtroom execution requires tactile evidence. I engaged my high-capacity laser printer. The machine whirred to life. The sharp scent of hot toner filled the room as the device spit out reams of crisp, heavy stock paper. I categorized the evidence with forensic precision. I utilized pristine, color-coded binders to segment the federal crimes. The first binder received a blood-red spine. Inside, I loaded the electronic health record metadata, the pixel-by-pixel signature splice analysis, and the static internet protocol logs linking the forged hospice documents directly to Winston's law firm's servers. I aligned the pages, punched the holes, and snapped the steel rings shut. I constructed the second binder using a deep, navy blue spine. This contained the financial devastation. I inserted the captured images of the fraudulent municipal lien against Beatrice's apartment complex. I added the private equity loan origination agreement, highlighting Robert and Sylvia's forged executor signatures. Finally, I filed the interstate wire transfer routing numbers, tracking the stolen $1,200,000 to the Miami penthouse and the luxury yacht. I snapped the final binder closed. The heavy folders rested on my glass desk, a physical manifestation of a federal indictment. The weight of the paper felt substantial beneath my fingertips. The documents transformed state-level slander into inescapable federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. The digital hunt concluded. The physical assembly finished. I required the tactical assault team. I reached for my encrypted satellite phone, a device retained from my federal consulting contracts, bypassing commercial cellular networks entirely. I executed the first call. I dialed the direct, unlisted number from my corporate legal counsel, an aggressive litigation specialist who dismantles hostile takeovers. She answered on the first ring. I briefed her on the mediation timeline, providing the address for Winston's office. She confirmed her attendance for 2 o'clock the following afternoon. She requested no further details. She understood my methods. I initiated the next phase. I typed a sequence of digits to access 3 highly classified, dedicated intake lines. First, I contacted my liaison at the Department of Justice. I transmitted the encrypted audio files of Robert and Winston executing their extortion demands across state lines. The data packet transferred silently over the secured connection. Second, I engaged the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Division. I forwarded the unredacted metadata, proving Winston utilized his firm's servers to fabricate medical documents and suborn perjury. I provided the exact file pathways and timestamp hashes. Third, I contacted the Drug Enforcement Administration Diversion Unit. I submitted the irrefutable proof that my parents manufactured federal narcotic logs to leverage a civil inheritance dispute, weaponizing scheduled banturos, controlled substances in a fraudulent civil filing. I provided the exact coordinates of Winston's downtown law firm to all 3 agencies. I supplied the precise time the targets would gather in a single, enclosed room. I terminated the final call. The rain continued to lash against the glass of my office window. I sat in the dark, watching the storm, feeling the cold. Clinical anticipation settled in my bones. I packed the color-coded binders into my heavy leather briefcase, securing the brass clasps. I placed the briefcase by the front door. The execution chamber awaited. At exactly 1:55 in the afternoon on August 20, 2026, I stepped onto the polished concrete of the downtown financial district. The previous night's storm had washed the city streets clean, leaving the pavement slick and reflecting the towering monoliths of steel and glass. Winston's law firm occupied the 40th floor of the most imposing structure on the block, a fortress of corporate intimidation. I did not gaze up at the skyscraper. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, adjusted my grip on the heavy leather handle of my briefcase, and walked through the revolving doors. My heels struck the marble lobby floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence. I approached the security desk, presented my government identification, and secured my visitor credential. I bypassed the crowded commuter elevators, selecting the express car reserved for executive suites. The metal doors slid shut, sealing me inside the ascending stainless steel box. I monitored the floor numbers climbing rapidly on the digital display. My pulse remained steady. The erratic, terrified nurse Robert and Sylvia expected to meet did not exist. I replaced her with an auditor carrying absolute, concentrated ruin. The elevator chimed, depositing me into a reception area designed to broadcast exorbitant wealth. Abstract art hung on mahogany-paneled walls. The scent of espresso and expensive leather permeated the climate-controlled air. A receptionist wearing a headset intercepted my arrival. I provided my name. Her fingers danced across a sleek keyboard, and she gestured toward a sprawling hallway. I followed her past a gauntlet of glass-enclosed offices where junior associates drafted contracts and finalized settlements. We approached the primary conference room at the terminus of the corridor. The architectural layout featured floor-to-ceiling frosted glass walls, offering an illusion of transparency while maintaining acoustic isolation. The receptionist pulled the heavy door open and stepped aside. I crossed the threshold. The architects of my attempted destruction already occupied the room. Robert and Sylvia sat on the far side of a massive frosted glass table. They positioned themselves strategically, backing the expansive city skyline, forcing anyone across from them to stare into the glaring afternoon sun. They sought every possible psychological advantage. Robert leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his suit jacket unbuttoned, projecting the relaxed, expansive posture of a conqueror claiming his spoils. Sylvia sat beside him, nursing a crystal glass of sparkling water. A heavy diamond tennis bracelet encircled her wrist, catching the overhead lighting, a piece undoubtedly financed by the stolen $1,200,000 bridge loan. Winston anchored the head of the table. He wore a custom, double-breasted suit, his posture radiating greasy, unchecked ego. He tapped a silver fountain pen against a thick stack of printed paper resting before him. The relinquishment agreements, the forged documents designed to strip me of the $4,500,000 estate and hand my grandmother's legacy directly to the parasites. They paused their conversation the second I entered. 3 pairs of eyes raked over my physical form, searching for the shattered, weeping victim they spent weeks engineering. They anticipated slumped shoulders. They expected bloodshot eyes, trembling hands, and a voice cracking with surrender. They wanted a woman broken by the threat of federal prison and the destruction of her nursing license. Sylvia lowered her crystal glass to the table, her bright red lips curling into a smirk of undisguised, venomous contempt. She believed she finally broke the stubborn teenager she abandoned a decade prior. Robert did not even bother to stand. He flicked his wrist, gesturing loosely toward a low-slung, uncomfortable chair positioned directly across from them, physically isolating me on the empty side of the room. Winston flashed a predatory grin, displaying rows of perfectly veneered teeth. "Valentina," he purred, his voice dripping with condescension. "Punctual. Excellent. Please, have a seat. Let us conclude this unfortunate family business quietly and efficiently. Your parents graciously agreed to pause the litigation, provided we execute these signatures today." He pushed the thick stack of paper toward the center of the glass table. He pointed the tip of his silver pen at the signature line. I did not walk toward the chair. I did not reach for the pen. I remained planted firmly on the threshold, holding the heavy glass door open with my left hand. My spine remained completely rigid. I held my chin parallel to the floor, meeting Winston's arrogant gaze with glacial indifference. Heavy, measured footsteps echoed down the marble corridor behind me. Evelyn, my corporate litigation counsel, stepped into the doorframe. She did not wear a standard business suit. She wore an imposing navy trench coat, clutching a sleek leather folio against her side. She radiated the cold, mechanical authority of a legal executioner. Elite legal circles operate within a microscopic radius. Evelyn built her career dismantling hostile corporate takeovers and burying corrupt executives under mountains of irrefutable discovery data. She did not negotiate, she annihilated. Evelyn crossed the threshold. Stepping into the conference room, I stepped inside right beside her. Evelyn released her grip on her folio, reached out, and pushed the heavy glass door shut. She grabbed the stainless steel deadbolt mechanism and turned the latch. The lock engaged with a sharp, echoing click. She sealed the exit. She trapped them inside the room. Winston's silver pen halted in midair. The tip hovered just inches above the fraudulent surrender documents. His predatory grin faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching as his brain struggled to process the sudden intrusion. He recognized Evelyn instantly. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly, pale hue across his jawline. His posture stiffened. The arrogant, untouchable lawyer vanished, replaced by a man suddenly realizing he miscalculated his opponent's resources. Sylvia blinked rapidly, her smirk dissolving into deep, profound confusion. She looked at Robert. Robert sat forward, dropping the relaxed conqueror posture. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white as his eyes darted between Evelyn and the locked door. The atmosphere in the room shifted with violent velocity. The temperature plummeted. The confident, greedy anticipation evaporated, sucked out of the room through the ventilation system, replaced by a dense, suffocating tension. I did not offer a greeting. I did not apologize for bringing counsel to a private mediation. I bypassed the uncomfortable chair Robert assigned to me and walked directly to the center of the frosted glass table. I lifted my heavy leather briefcase, the brass clasps catching the afternoon light. I held it suspended over the surface for a fraction of a second. I released my grip. The briefcase slammed onto the glass table with a heavy, definitive thud. The impact rattled Sylvia's crystal water glass, sending a small wave of liquid splashing over the rim. I rested my palms flat on the leather surface of the briefcase. I looked directly at Robert, then Sylvia, and finally locked my eyes onto Winston. The trap I constructed over the past 72 hours officially snapped shut. The execution chamber was sealed, the audience was seated, and the presentation of their absolute destruction was ready to commence. I unlocked the brass clasps on my heavy leather briefcase. The metallic clicks pierced the suffocating silence of the conference room like snapping dry branches. I lifted the lid, reaching inside to extract the first dossier. It possessed a blood-red spine, thick and heavy with irrefutable data. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl the binder or shout accusations. I pushed the heavy folder across the frosted glass table. It glided smoothly, stopping exactly 1 inch from Winston's folded hands. "You brought photocopied paper to a digital execution, Winston," I stated. My voice dropped to a lethal, clinical whisper, lacking any trace of the terrified daughter they expected. Winston stared at the red spine. He did not reach for it, beside me. Evelyn unbuttoned her navy trench coat, walked toward the room's central media console, and plugged a sleek, encrypted flash drive directly into the primary port. She tapped a sequence on the glass control panel. The motorized window blinds descended, plunging the room into artificial shadow. A massive high-definition projector screen unrolled from the ceiling, humming as it lowered directly behind Winston's chair. "Turn around," I instructed. Robert and Sylvia twisted in their seats. Winston rotated his leather chair, his eyes fixing on the glowing screen. The projector flared to life. I did not show them spreadsheets or dense legal text. I projected the exact emergency suspension notice they engineered, side by side with the fabricated hospice pharmacy logs they submitted to the State Board of Nursing and the probate court. "You assumed a printed signature created reality?" I continued, pacing slowly along the edge of the glass table. "You assumed regulatory boards operate solely on ink and paper, but modern medical infrastructure relies entirely on digital architecture. Every single file you create generates an immutable forensic footprint." I tapped a small wireless remote resting in my palm. The image on the screen shifted. The software peeled back the visual layer of the pharmacy log, exposing the raw hexadecimal code and the embedded metadata tags beneath the document. "You submitted logs claiming I diverted liquid morphine during my grandmother's final hospice days," I explained, projecting the extracted timestamps in bold, red font across the screen. "Look at the document creation date hidden in your file's architecture. August 12th, 2026. Sylvia blinked, her eyes darting between the screen and my face. "Beatrice ceased breathing on August 1st. I stated, letting the chronological impossibility echo in the confined space. You manufactured medical records detailing active narcotic administration 11 days after the patient occupied a mahogany casket. Winston's jaw muscles tightened. The blood drained from his cheeks. His legal mind instantly comprehended the severity of the timestamp. He knew I possessed the metadata. I clicked the remote again. A network routing map materialized on the projector. A bright crimson line traced a digital signal bouncing from a commercial internet service provider, anchoring directly to a static internet protocol address. I extracted the routing node from your file generation history, I whispered. Stepping directly into Winston's peripheral vision, the digital footprint bypasses the hospice intranet entirely. It anchors to this exact building. It registers to the private network of this specific law firm. You did not infiltrate a hospital database. Winston, you sat in this mahogany office, opened a portable document format editor, and manually typed fraudulent narcotic inventory sheets to extort me. Sylvia's spine bowed. Her cashmere shawl slipped from her shoulders, pooling unheeded onto the carpet. The manufactured aristocratic arrogance melted from her features, replaced by stark, hollow terror. She shrank into the depths of her expensive ergonomic chair, making herself as small as possible. Winston gripped the armrests of his chair. He stared at the screen, recognizing his own digital fingerprints. He understood the implications. He submitted these exact documents to a probate judge. He anchored his state bar license to subornation of perjury and fraud upon the court. A single anomaly remained, I continued, advancing the slide. The screen magnified the palliative care physician's signature from the forged document, zooming in 800%. A regulatory board flags type names, but a cursive signature carries authority. So, you stole one. I pointed to the jagged, rectangular halo framing the cursive script. Visual perfection fails under microscopic magnification. The pixels degrade into severe compression artifacts. You spliced the identity of a licensed medical doctor to authorize the existence of phantom drugs. I clicked the remote a final time. The algorithm overlaid the forged signature directly on top of an authentic medical authorization for a bedside oxygen tank, dated July 15th, 2026. The slant, the pressure points, and the microscopic ink variations aligned with 100% biometric certainty. You utilized a digital lasso tool, I stated, my voice echoing off the frosted glass walls. You cropped a legitimate signature and pasted it onto your fabrication. You committed federal identity theft to steal $4,500,000. The silence in the conference room thickened into concrete. Winston stared at the overlay, completely paralyzed. He possessed no legal defense against raw, encrypted math. Robert erupted. The narcissistic patriarch refused to accept defeat. His ego demanded a counterattack. He shoved his chair backward. The heavy wooden legs grated violently against the marble floor. He planted his palms flat on the glass table and propelled his aging frame upward, his face flushing a violent, mottled crimson. "This is hacker garbage," Robert roared, spit flying from his lips, his voice cracking with manufactured outrage. He pointed a trembling, aggressive finger at the projector screen. "You generated those fake computer screens to scare us. Digital logs mean absolutely nothing. The State Board of Nursing holds the physical paper. They hold the official complaint. They suspended your license, and you face federal drug charges. You cannot manipulate your way out of a prison sentence with fake computer graphics." I remained perfectly still. I did not flinch at his volume. I looked at the man who drained my college fund and attempted to strip my freedom. "Sit down, Robert," I commanded. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute chilling authority in my tone struck him like a physical blow. He hesitated, his chest heaving, his finger still suspended in the air. "Sit down." Evelyn echoed from the corner of the room. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the brass handle of the locked door, projecting lethal corporate menace. Robert slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his breathing ragged, his eyes darting frantically around the room. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. I extracted a single, crisp piece of heavy cardstock bearing the embossed gold seal of the State Board of Nursing. I slid it across the glass table, positioning it directly over Winston's forged surrender documents. "I do not need to manipulate my way out of anything," I informed him, leaning forward, resting my knuckles against the cold glass. "I transmitted this exact forensic metadata to the Regulatory Board investigators 72 hours ago. I provided them the encryption hashes, the Internet protocol logs, and the pixel analysis." I watched Robert's eyes scan the gold seal. "The State Board of Nursing reviewed the data," I stated. "They cross-referenced the hospice dispensing nodes. They identified your forgery immediately. They dropped the investigation, cleared my name, and officially reinstated my nursing license at 8 o'clock this morning." The realization struck the three grifters with the kinetic force of a freight train. The oxygen vanished from their lungs. Their primary weapon, the extortion leverage, the threat of federal prison, the suspended license snapped in half. It ceased to exist. They constructed a massive, intricate trap utilizing blackmail and character assassination, only to discover I dismantled the foundation days prior. They held absolutely nothing. They possessed zero leverage. They simply sat in a locked room, completely exposed, staring at the architect of their impending destruction. Winston's mouth opened, his survival instincts kicked into overdrive, his brain scrambling to construct a plausible legal defense for the catastrophic medical forgery I just exposed. He raised his hands, adopting a placating gesture, preparing to spin a manufactured narrative about clerical errors, rogue paralegals, and simple misunderstandings. I did not grant him the oxygen to speak. I reached back into the dark interior of my heavy leather briefcase. My fingers grazed the brass clasps, closing around the thick, textured cover of the second dossier. I extracted the binder. It possessed a deep, navy blue spine. I dropped it onto the frosted glass table. The heavy folder slid across the smooth surface, colliding gently with the blood-red medical dossier. I pressed the wireless remote resting in my palm. The projector screen behind Winston flickered, wiping the forged pharmacy logs from existence. A highly magnified municipal property deed materialized in the artificial shadow of the conference room. It displayed the parcel identification number corresponding to Beatrice's most lucrative commercial asset, the 90-unit apartment complex. "You assumed the conservatorship represented a guaranteed victory," I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air. "You believed you engineered an inescapable psychological pressure cooker. You thought I would surrender the executor status without a fight to avoid federal drug charges." I advanced the slide. A dense, multi-page commercial lien document filled the screen. "Grifters suffer from a fatal, biological flaw," I continued, pacing slowly behind my leather chair. "You lack patience. You require immediate validation. You could not endure the bureaucratic timeline of the probate court. You reached into the vault before you even possessed the combination." I directed my laser pointer toward the financial summary block on the projected document. "You bypassed legitimate federal banking institutions," I explained, tracking the red laser across the lender identification line. "You sought capital from a predatory private equity firm operating out of Delaware, a shadow lender willing to overlook missing judicial signatures in exchange for exorbitant interest rates. You secured a collateralized bridge loan against a commercial property you do not legally own." I clicked the remote, magnifying the disbursement total. "You extracted exactly $1,200,000. I shifted my focus to the head of the table. Winston stopped tapping his silver pen. He froze, his eyes locked onto the projected lien. "You facilitated the transaction, Winston," I stated, my voice echoing off the mahogany paneling. "You utilized your state bar credential to validate a pending, unruled court motion as proof of legal ownership. You signed the origination agreement, personally guaranteeing their fiduciary authority." I recited the law with absolute, mechanical precision. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1344, Bank Fraud, Pledging Stolen Collateral to Secure a Financial Advance. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, Wire Fraud, Utilizing Interstate Telecommunication Networks to Transmit Illicit Capital. I clicked the remote again. The screen flashed, displaying a complex, sprawling digital routing map. Bright green lines crisscross the display, tracking a massive capital injection across state lines. The Delaware equity firm wired the $1,200,000 directly into your corporate escrow account. Winston, I announced, pointing at the receiving routing integer on the screen. You commingled fraudulent commercial loan disbursements within your client trust ledger. You transformed this mahogany-paneled law firm into an active, aggressive money laundering conduit. Winston's facial structure seemed to collapse inward. The aggressive, predatory tan he cultivated turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. Sweat beaded along his hairline, catching the harsh light of the projector. His breath hitched. He realized I penetrated the digital architecture of his supposedly impenetrable financial sanctuary. He realized I possessed the exact routing integers of his corrupt escrow accounts. The invincible attorney suddenly faced absolute ruin. I advanced the slide again. 2 distinct wire transfer receipts appeared side by side. You claimed your administrative fee, I noted, watching Winston swallow convulsively. Then you splintered the remaining capital. You executed 2 interstate wire transfers on behalf of your clients. The first transfer bounced through a financial clearinghouse in Atlanta, dropping into a commercial real estate trust located in southern Florida. I looked directly at Sylvia. She sat paralyzed, her manicured hands trembling violently in her lap. The diamond tennis bracelet clicked faintly against the glass table. You initiated a massive, non-refundable down payment for a panoramic penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. I moved the laser pointer to the second receipt. The second wire traveled to a maritime brokerage operating out of Fort Lauderdale. You placed a heavy deposit on a 60-foot luxury motor yacht. I rested my hands on the glass table, leaning forward, closing the physical distance between myself and the architects of my attempted destruction. You did not purchase a glamorous new life on the water, I whispered, holding Robert's terrified gaze. You financed your own federal incarceration. Every signature you applied, every routing number you generated, constitutes a distinct punishable federal felony. The money you stole locked the cell doors behind you. The reality of the federal bank fraud finally pierced Robert's towering ego. The bravado evaporated entirely. His chest began to heave in rapid, shallow jerks. He gasped for air, his hands flying to his chest, clutching the lapels of his navy pinstripe suit. He hyperventilated, the oxygen failing to reach his lungs. He yanked at his silk tie, ripping the fabric away from his throat. He stared at the wire transfer receipts glowing on the projector screen. He realized the state-level slander campaign he orchestrated just mutated into decades behind the concrete walls of a federal penitentiary. Survival instincts eradicate loyalty. Robert pushed himself upright. His chair wobbled precariously, the wooden legs screeching against the marble. He pointed a shaking, sweating finger directly at the head of the table. "He orchestrated the loan," Robert shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical wail. "Winston told us to do it. We did not know the legal parameters. He provided the Delaware contacts, he processed the paperwork, he promised the conservatorship petition would protect the collateral." Winston snapped. The threat of disbarment and federal prison obliterated his professional composure. He slammed his fists onto the frosted glass table, shattering the sacred boundary of attorney-client privilege in a pathetic, desperate attempt to save his own skin. "You lying, greedy parasites!" Winston roared, spit flying from his lips. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched collar. "You demanded the cash. You harassed my paralegals every single morning, threatening to retain alternative counsel if I refused to secure the advance. I only drafted the paperwork based on your fraudulent assurances." Sylvia leaped from her chair, her cashmere shawl trampled beneath her expensive heels. She lunged forward, her pristine, manufactured elegance completely destroyed. "You told us the money was secure," Sylvia screamed, her voice echoing violently off the frosted glass walls, pointing a trembling, accusing finger at the sleazy attorney. "You claimed the estate belonged to us. You promised Valentina would surrender the executor status. You said the nursing board complaint would break her in 48 hours. I cannot control the fact that you generated incompetent forgeries," Winston bellowed, pointing frantically at the projector screen displaying the spliced physician signatures. You handed me radioactive documents. You ruined my firm. You dragged my escrow accounts into a federal wire fraud investigation. We paid you to protect us, Robert bellowed, slamming his hand against the glass. We will testify against you. We will tell the federal prosecutors everything. I stood in absolute, unbroken silence. Evelyn remained by the locked door, a silent sentinel monitoring the chaos. She clutched her leather folio, her expression an impenetrable mask of cold, legal detachment. I folded my hands over my charcoal suit jacket. I watched the architects of my lifelong misery tear each other apart in the sterile conference room. The polished facade of their alliance completely disintegrated. The arrogant predators transformed into three-cornered, terrified criminals violently clawing at one another, desperate to escape the blast radius of their own explosive greed. The shrieking match between Robert and Winston burned out, extinguishing itself as the sheer lack of oxygen in the room choked their vocal cords. Sylvia ceased yelling. She stared at the illuminated projector screen, watching the digital map of her financial crimes glowing in the dim artificial shadow. The aristocratic facade, maintained meticulously for decades, fractured and shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. Her knees buckled. She collided with the marble floor, the impact driving a sharp, involuntary gasp from her lungs. She did not rise. The manufactured elegance she weaponized at the cemetery completely evaporated. She dragged her body forward, the expensive fabric of her designer dress bunching and scraping against the polished stone. She crawled toward my side of the frosted glass table, her movements erratic and desperate. Sylvia reached upward, her manicured fingers trembling violently as they clutched the edge of the glass. Pulling herself up just enough to meet my gaze, black mascara ran in thick, jagged streams down her cheeks, staining her immaculate foundation. "Valentina," Sylvia choked out, her voice a pathetic, ragged wheeze. "Please, please, sweetheart." She extended her hand, attempting to grab the cuff of my trousers. I took a measured, deliberate step backward, ensuring her grasping fingers closed around empty air. "We are family," she wept, the tears flowing freely now, not tears of genuine remorse, but tears of raw, biological terror. "We just wanted a comfortable retirement. That's all we wanted. We panicked. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. You must know we never actually intended to hurt you." She pointed a shaking finger toward the navy blue binder resting on the table. "We will reverse the wire transfers today," she pleaded, the words spilling from her mouth in a frantic torrent. "We will cancel the down payment on the Miami penthouse. We will return the yacht deposit. We will put the $1,200,000 back into the estate account this very afternoon. We will walk away with nothing. Just shred those binders, please. Valentina, destroy the files. Let us leave this room." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor. I did not see a mother. I saw the predator who abandoned an 18-year-old girl in an empty, stripped house with a single sheet of printer paper. I saw the grifter who forged hospice pharmacy logs, utilizing the agonizing death of her own mother-in-law to fabricate a federal narcotics case against her only child. "You abandoned me at 18 to finance your luxury condominium," I stated. My voice echoed with glacial finality in the confined space, devoid of a single ounce of empathy. "You filed forged medical documents to the State Board of Nursing. You attempted to frame me for felony drug diversion. You tried to orchestrate a narrative that would lock me inside a federal penitentiary for the next 20 years. Sylvia shook her head rapidly, a desperate, hysterical denial, her hands clapping together in a begging posture. "I am a forensic auditor," I informed her, holding her terrified gaze. "I investigate raw data. I compile immutable evidence. I do not possess the legal authority to shred federal evidence. I am not a judge." The word federal pierced the frantic fog enveloping Winston's brain. The sleazy attorney stopped glaring at Robert. He snapped his head toward the projector screen, his eyes locking onto the static internet protocol logs, anchoring the forgery directly to his firm. The realization struck his central nervous system like a defibrillator. The evidence resided on his network. The digital footprints remained buried within his servers. sitting in the climate-controlled data closet just down the hall. Winston lunged across the glass table. He scrambled frantically, his sweating hands slipping against the smooth surface as he grasped for his smartphone. He snatched the device, his thumb jabbing erratically at the screen. He needed to execute a remote wipe. He needed to contact his information technology administrator and order an immediate, catastrophic purge of the firm's hard drives. He believed he could incinerate the digital trail before law enforcement secured a warrant, obliterating the metadata connecting him to the medical forgery and the bank fraud. I watched his panicked, uncoordinated movements. The sweat dripped from his forehead, landing on the glass screen of his phone, causing his frantic swipes to fail. "Save your battery, Winston," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy, stagnant air of the conference room. Winston froze, his thumb hovering over the glass screen. He looked up, his breathing shallow and rapid, his chest heaving under his custom suit. I raised my left arm, pulling back the cuff of my charcoal suit jacket. I examined the face of my watch. The gold hands ticked forward with mechanical, relentless precision. The silence in the room amplified the faint, rhythmic ticking of the timepiece. "It is exactly 2:22 in the afternoon," I announced, dropping my wrist back to my side. "You cannot wipe your servers. The data is already duplicated, archived, and secured within federal holding vaults." Winston's mouth fell open. The smartphone slipped from his trembling grip, clattering loudly against the frosted glass table. "Exactly 10 minutes ago," I continued, holding his horrified gaze, "while you were busy screaming at Robert and actively destroying your attorney-client privilege, my automated servers executed a secure, encrypted data transfer." I detailed the exact trajectory of the payload, driving the final, lethal stakes into their fabricated reality. I transmitted the unredacted medical forgery dossier and the bank fraud ledgers directly to the prosecuting attorneys at the Department of Justice. I stated, checking off the agencies with cold, calculated rhythm. I forwarded the specific Internet protocol routing hashes and the wire transfer logs to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I turned my attention back to Robert, who sat entirely paralyzed in his chair, and Sylvia, who remained crumpled on the floor. I ensured they understood the absolute, inescapable finality of their situation. "And regarding the fabricated narcotic logs," I whispered. The words hanging heavy in the sterile room, I routed the hospice metadata and the spliced physician signatures directly to the regional directors of the Drug Enforcement Administration. The trap was not merely sprung, the concrete had poured, and it was rapidly curing around their ankles. They built a fragile house of cards, utilizing extortion, slander, and forged paper. I deployed a digital hurricane. The escape routes evaporated. The servers were compromised. The federal agencies possessed the maps, the timelines, and the irrefutable mathematical proof of their towering, explosive greed. The point of no return vanished into the rearview mirror 10 minutes prior, leaving them stranded in the execution chamber. The silence inside the conference room stretched into a suffocating vacuum. Winston, Robert, and Sylvia remained entirely paralyzed, trapped within the immediate aftermath of the digital hurricane I unleashed. They possessed no counter-arguments. They held no leverage. They stared at the glowing projector screen, watching the irrefutable mathematical proof of their towering, explosive greed illuminate the darkened room. The sterile quiet shattered. A sharp, chaotic disturbance erupted from the reception area down the corridor. The muffled sound of shouting voices penetrated the acoustic isolation of the frosted glass walls. Heavy, synchronized footfalls pounded against the marble floor, multiplying rapidly, marching with aggressive, unyielding velocity directly toward the executive suites. Evelyn turned away from the locked door. She reached for the stainless steel deadbolt mechanism, grasping the latch. She twisted her wrist, disengaging the lock with a sharp click, and stepped backward, clearing the threshold. The heavy glass doors slammed inward. The brass hinges shrieked under the violent kinetic force. 4 individuals surged into the room. their movements rapid and terrifyingly precise. They wore dark navy windbreakers bearing the bold, yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation across their backs. Two investigators wearing tactical vests adorned with the Drug Enforcement Administration insignia followed immediately behind them, establishing a rigid perimeter around the frosted glass table. They did not offer pleasantries, they did not produce subpoenas or ask for permission to enter the premises. They executed a coordinated, overwhelming tactical assault. Winston pushed himself upward, his survival instincts driving a desperate, foolish response. He raised his hands, opening his mouth, attempting to weaponize his professional status to halt the invasion. "I am legal counsel. This is a private mediation. You have no authorization to—" The lead federal agent bypassed the table, closed the distance, and silenced the attorney instantly. The agent grabbed the lapels of Winston's custom, double-breasted suit, spinning the lawyer around with brutal efficiency. The agent drove Winston's chest forcefully into the frosted glass partition. The impact shook the wall, rattling the metal framing. Winston expelled a sharp, breathless grunt. His cheek smashed flat against the cold pane. The agent kicked Winston's legs apart, forcing him into a wide, unstable stance, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The harsh, metallic click of cold steel handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed through the room. "You possess the right to remain silent," the agent barked, reciting the Miranda warning while pressing his forearm against Winston's spine. A secondary agent spoke into a shoulder-mounted radio, confirming securing the target. The radio crackled back, an overlapping voice announcing that a separate tactical squad successfully breached the firm's data closets down the hall. They seized the servers. They severed the network. Winston's digital sanctuary fell into federal custody. Robert watched the invincible attorney hit the glass, the narcissistic patriarch's ego completely fractured. The psychological dam broke, unleashing a tidal wave of unadulterated terror. The blood rushed from his head. His knees buckled, failing to support his weight. He slid off his ergonomic chair, crashing heavily onto the carpeted floor. He dropped to his knees, his hands flying to his chest. A full panic attack consumed his central nervous system. He gasped for oxygen, his mouth opening wide, emitting high-pitched, ragged wheezes. Thick tears streamed down his flushed cheeks, mixing with the heavy sweat pouring from his hairline. The man who orchestrated my financial abandonment, the man who arrogantly threatened my freedom, now wept openly on the floor, reduced to a pathetic, shivering shell. Two agents flanked him. They did not offer assistance. They gripped his upper arms, hauling him upright just enough to secure his wrists. They pulled his arms backward, ignoring his frantic, sobbing pleas, and snapped the steel cuffs around his wrists. They locked him in place, neutralizing the patriarch entirely. The investigators from the Drug Enforcement Administration targeted Sylvia. She recognized the insignia on their tactical vests. She realized the fabricated narcotic logs summoned the heaviest artillery available. The aristocratic facade she maintained for decades disintegrated. Sylvia scrambled backward, her expensive heels slipping against the floorboards. She crawled away from the agents, her designer dress twisting and bunching around her knees. "No," Sylvia shrieked, her voice tearing her vocal cords, echoing violently against the mahogany paneling. "I did not touch any drugs. It was a mistake. We just wanted the money." The investigators closed the gap. They reached down, seizing her by the biceps. They hauled her upward, their grips unyielding. Sylvia thrashes wildly. She kicked her legs, twisting her torso, fighting the physical restraint with raw, animalistic desperation. The agents overpowered her instantly, securing her wrists behind her back. They dragged her toward the doorway. Sylvia dug her heels into the carpet, resisting the forward momentum. She twisted her neck, locking her tear-streaked eyes onto my face. "Valentina!" Sylvia screamed, the sound raw and desperate. Tell them to stop. I am your mother. We are your family." I stood perfectly still at the center of the frosted glass table. I rested my palms flat against the smooth leather surface of my heavy briefcase. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I surveyed the wreckage of their lives. I watched the agents bag Winston's laptop. I watched Robert hyperventilate, his chin resting against his chest as the officers secured his perimeter. I listened to Sylvia's frantic, echoing shrieks as the agents hauled her bodily out of the luxurious office. I searched my internal emotional registry for a single trace of pity. I looked for a fraction of guilt, a fleeting whisper of familial obligation. I found absolutely nothing. I experienced the pure, unadulterated satisfaction of a flawlessly executed operation. I audited their crimes. I traced the digital ledgers. I exposed the liabilities. The equation balanced perfectly. The parasites who drained my college fund, slandered my professional reputation, and attempted to cage me inside a federal penitentiary now faced decades behind concrete walls. The federal agents marched the three grifters out of the conference room. Sylvia's screams faded down the marble corridor, swallowed by the ding of the arriving elevator banks. Evelyn walked over to the primary media console, retrieving her encrypted flash drive. She slid the device into her pocket, turned toward me, and offered a single, sharp nod of profound professional respect. I lifted my hands from the briefcase. I engaged the brass clasps, securing the empty leather interior, and gripped the heavy handle. I turned my back on the projector screen, ignoring the glowing digital map of their ruined empire, and walked out the door. We retraced our path down the sprawling hallway. The opulent law firm resembled a war zone. Dozens of junior associates, paralegals, and administrative staff pressed themselves against the glass walls of their offices, their faces pale with shock as federal teams dismantled their workplace, seizing hard drives and boxing physical files. I walked past them, my posture immaculate, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the marble floor. We reached the executive elevators. The stainless steel doors opened immediately. I stepped inside the car, turning to face the ruined lobby. The doors slid shut, sealing the chaos away. The elevator descended 40 floors in rapid, silent freefall. I crossed the main security vestibule, bypassed the frozen guards, and pushed through the heavy revolving doors. I stepped out of the monolithic skyscraper onto the concrete sidewalk. The storm clouds cleared during the mediation, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding blue. The bright afternoon sun hit my face, warming my skin, erasing the chill of the air-conditioned execution chamber. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean air of the city. I adjusted my grip on my briefcase, turned toward the avenue, and walked forward, completely, untouchably free. 6 months elapsed. The calendar shifted to February 2027. Frost coated the expansive windows of my new corner office, but the internal climate remained perfectly controlled. The fallout from the August mediation leveled Winston's career with the devastating kinetic force of a wrecking ball. The State Bar Association did not merely suspend his credentials, they executed a rapid, permanent disbarment. Federal prosecutors offered zero leniency for an officer of the court caught actively laundering stolen capital. I sat in the gallery during his sentencing hearing. The presiding judge delivered a scathing reprimand, striking the gavel and sentencing the arrogant attorney to 12 years in a maximum security federal facility. Winston stood before the bench, his shoulders slumped. Completely stripped of his custom tailoring and expensive colognes, he wore a heavy, standard-issue institutional jumpsuit. His boutique firm dissolved overnight. Junior associates scrambled to resign, and building management scraped his gold-leafed name off the glass doors of the 40th floor suite. The government seized his remaining escrow accounts to compensate the victims of his previous extortions. Robert and Sylvia lacked the financial resources and the psychological stamina to endure a protracted federal trial. The mountain of encrypted digital evidence, the network logs, the spliced medical signatures, the wire transfer routing hashes crushed their public defenders before the discovery phase even concluded. Realizing a jury would convict them in minutes, they signed a plea agreement. They pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The federal courts initiated immediate asset forfeiture. Marshals descended upon the Miami penthouses and the Fort Lauderdale maritime brokerages, seizing the properties funded by the illicit $1 million $200,000 bridge loan. The authorities did not stop at the stolen capital. to cover the massive punitive fines and restitution orders. The bankruptcy courts liquidated Robert and Sylvia's remaining Florida condominium. Federal agents carted away their designer furniture, the expensive artwork, and the vintage jewelry Sylvia prioritized over her own daughter. Today, they reside in separate federal penitentiaries located hundreds of miles apart, their communications heavily monitored and restricted. Robert paces a narrow, concrete cell. He no longer commands boardrooms or issues demands. He obeys harsh, fluorescent-lit schedules, forced to submit to the rigid authority of federal guards. His towering superiority complex crumbled entirely beneath the weight of his absolute powerlessness. Sylvia faces an equally brutal reality. She no longer hosts country club luncheons or drapes herself in cashmere shawls. She scrubs industrial aluminum food trays in the prison cafeteria. The manufactured aristocratic arrogance she weaponized for decades evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, bankrupt inmate wearing a scratchy, ill-fitting uniform. They gambled their freedom to steal a fortune, and they lost their entire existence. I did not utilize Beatrice's $4,500,000 estate to purchase sports cars or retreat to a private island. I honored the tactical brilliance of the woman who built the empire. I leased a sprawling, sunlit commercial office space in the heart of the city's legal district. I mounted heavy brass letters onto the brick facade, the Beatrice Advocacy Clinic. I utilized the capital to hire a specialized, aggressive team of elder law litigators, forensic accountants, and clinical compliance nurses. We operate a highly specialized legal advocacy fortress for elderly victims of financial abuse and medical exploitation. We do not accept settlements. We deploy the exact same proprietary auditing software I used to trace Winston's forged documents. When a predatory relative attempts to drain a pension, we track the routing numbers across state lines. When a corrupt caregiver alters a living will, we extract the metadata and expose the forgery. We audit suspicious powers of attorney. We file emergency injunctions to freeze compromised bank accounts. We intercept fraudulent medical directives, dragging parasitic family members into the light and dismantling their extortion schemes line by line. We rip the masks off the predators who target vulnerable seniors, handing their digital footprints directly to federal law enforcement. Beatrice spent her life hiding her strength to protect her legacy from vultures. I utilized her legacy to build an impenetrable shield for others. The long, brutal journey to this absolute victory illuminates a critical, inescapable truth. Your inherent worth is never determined by the individuals who attempt to exploit you, even when those individuals share your genetic bloodline. Society constantly conditions us to endure toxic family dynamics in silence. Cultural expectations demand we absorb the abuse, swallow the disrespect, and compromise our boundaries to maintain a fabricated, miserable peace. True power requires obliterating that conditioning entirely. It demands recognizing your absolute boundaries and weaponizing your intellect to defend them. You possess no obligation to shrink your potential or dim your brilliance to fit comfortably inside their abusive narratives. Narcissists, manipulators, and grifters rely heavily on your silence. They bank on your fear of conflict. They expect you to surrender your resources simply because they demand them, utilizing guilt as a tether to keep you anchored to their control. When you refuse to play the role of the compliant victim, when you detach from the emotional manipulation, stand firmly in your truth, organize your evidence, and execute your defense with cold, clinical precision, you transform from a target into an untouchable force. You strip away their power the moment you realize their perceived authority is nothing but an illusion built on your compliance. If this story empowered you to recognize your own strength and set unforgiving boundaries against the toxic elements in your life, please hit the like button, drop down into the comments and share your thoughts, or tell us about a time you had to stand up against manipulation. Your voice matters, and your strength can inspire someone else currently fighting their own battle. Thank you so much for watching. Always remember to protect your peace, trust your intellect, and know your true worth. Goodbye.